SQL Server 2008 Reporting Services is a full-featured report writer and rendering engine that you can use to create, execute, and deliver reports, tables, and charts that draw their data from a variety of data sources, including Microsoft SQL Server and OLEDB data sources. Reporting Services includes a feature-rich designer hosted by either Visual Studio 2008 or SQL Server 2008 Business Intelligence Development Studio that you can use to create your reports. Reporting Services also comes with a click-once application, Report Builder, that can be used by information workers to create reports. Execute. The SQL Server Reporting Services execution engine executes your reports on the report server. Render. SQL Server Reporting Services can render reports into a number of different formats, including HTML, Adobe Acrobat PDF, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, text format, and XML, as well as a few other formats. Deliver. Reports can be rendered either on demand or on a schedule, and by setting up a Reporting Services subscription, you can enable reports to be delivered to users by email or dropped in a network folder. Program. Reporting Services includes several application programming interfaces, or APIs, that you can use to programmatically manipulate and manage reports and other Reporting Services elements. Reporting Services supports a wide variety of report types, including Tabular Reports. This is the standard banded report writer that many people associate when they think of reports. But Reporting Services goes far beyond tabular reports. You can also create matrix reports. These are also known sometimes as crosstab reports or pivot reports, a great way for summarizing and compressing information. Reporting Services also supports charts and graphs, as illustrated by this polar chart. And Reporting Services also supports reports containing parameters and groups, reports that aggregate data, reports containing totals and subtotals, interactive drill-down reports, and many other types of reports, including user-created ad hoc reports that can be created with Report Builder. Reporting Service supports a number of different output formats. HTML is the standard output format type, but Reporting Services also supports Adobe Acrobat PDF, Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Word, the TIFF format for images, the comma-separated value format for text, and, of course, XML format. Reporting Services supports a number of data input, including Microsoft SQL Server version 7.0 and later, data from a Microsoft Analysis Services server, that's 2000 or later, Oracle, Microsoft Access, and other OLEDB data sources, as well as ODBC data sources and XML data sources. So if it's in a database of any of these types, you can get at it and report on it using SQL Server Reporting Services. You can program against Reporting Services using a number of APIs. The first of those APIs is called URL access. This means that you can point your browser to a specific URL, and by passing parameters in the URL, you can control how the reports are rendered. Additionally, you can access the Reporting Services web services to programmatically manipulate reports, data sources, subscriptions, and other items of a report server project. You can also programmatically create Reporting Services extensions to extend Reporting Services. And finally, because Reporting Services stores the report definitions in XML format, you can actually generate reports by crafting the XML in your programs. Now, Reporting Services has a number of deployment and administration features as well. Those include various configuration utilities to help you configure Reporting Services, Report Manager which is a browser-based tool for managing your report server installation and the reports once they've been deployed from Visual Studio or SQL Server Business Intelligence Development Studio, sometimes also referred to as BIDS. SQL Server Reporting Services supports a fairly sophisticated role-based security system. And since Reporting Services is hosted in Visual Studio 2008, it supports all of the source code facilities of Visual Studio 2008. So what's new in SQL Server 2008 Reporting Services? Well, there's a lot of changes, including the fact that Reporting Services is now hosted outside of Internet Information Services on its own networking stack. There's been a number of improvements to the processing engine inside of Reporting Services. Now, previous versions of Reporting Services needed to take the entire report from the very first record to the very last record, from the very first page to the last page, and stick that and render it all in memory at runtime. This is no longer necessary. They rewrote the processing engine so they can take portions of the report and portions of the records. If you have let's say you have a report on 1 million records, it doesn't need to fit all 1 million records in memory at that one moment in time. It can take the first 200,000 and go through various chunks. Now, I don't know how many records it can actually fit in memory. That's going to depend on how much memory your server has at that moment in time. But the point is, you can do much larger reports because it doesn't need to stick it all in memory at once. This is a good thing. Now, Reporting Services has much better support for non-Microsoft browsers. So, therefore, you can now render most reports in Internet Explorer. Of course, you could always do that. Mozilla Firefox, Google's Chrome, Apple's Safari, and the Opera browser. Before, in previous versions of Reporting Services, reports would look great in Microsoft Internet Explorer, but other browsers, it was sort of a hit and miss. It might look good in Firefox or it might look terrible in Firefox, and it depended on a number of factors. Microsoft has done a lot of work to make this work better across the board. There's also been improvements in rendering output to the CSV, or comma separated value format, also sometimes just called the text format, and the Excel format. Now, previous versions of Reporting Services had problems rendering to these formats when we had lots of embedded and nested data. That's no longer a problem with the new rendering engine. A big change in Reporting Services is that SQL Server 2008 Reporting Services now supports the Microsoft Word format as an output format. Now, previously, if you wanted nice printer fidelity in your report, you had to output it to the PDF format. Now you have a choice to go PDF or Microsoft Word. And Microsoft Word, of course, has the advantage is that the output is then editable by most people with a copy of Microsoft Office. This is going to be great, too, if you want to produce mail merge type reports, because the Word format is great for that output. Now let's take a look at some of these new features. So let's first look at Reporting Services support for browsers. Here you can see a report, the Northwind Employees Report, rendered in Internet Explorer. Now, past versions of Reporting Services did well in Internet Explorer, as might be expected. But they didn't do so well, or at least not consistently well, in different browsers. But here you can see this same report in Google Chrome, as well as Mozilla Firefox, and you can see that it renders well across all three browsers. Let's go back to the Internet Explorer version of the report, and let's see how it looks in the new format, Microsoft Word. So we select Word here in this drop-down, and then we'll click the export link. We'll get this dialog where we'll click Open. And here we can see the report faithfully reproduced in Microsoft Word. How about that? SQL Server 2008 Reporting Services has completely reworked the report designer in Visual Studio and Microsoft SQL Server Business Intelligence Development Studio. A number of changes have occurred, including this new pane called the Report Data pane. Now, the previous versions of reporting services had a data view. We no longer have data view in the main designer area. It's been replaced with the Report Data pane. We have a new pane called the Grouping pane that lives at the bottom of the screen, and that shows you all the groups on the report, both static or row groups and dynamic or column groups. We have new zoom support now in the Visual Studio Designer, which is really nice because if you have a really large report and you want to fit it all and look at it on the screen at the same time, you can do that. You can zoom in or out various magnifications. Simple expressions. This means that right now, while we're designing the report, we see the name of the field, for example, last name instead of fields, bang, last name dot value, as we would see on previous versions of reporting services. The actual expression's still there underneath the scenes, but it makes it real easier while we're designing the report to see what we're doing. There's many dialogue improvements. One in particular that tickles my fancy is now we can actually select from a picture button to change from portrait to landscape mode or back. Another big change in reporting services is that what we had in the past were different data regions. We had the table region for creating tabular reports, the list region for creating freeform style reports, and the matrix region for creating pivot, crosstab, or matrix reports. Now we have a single region called the Tablix data region, which merges the features of all three of those regions together. Let's now take a look at some of these features that I've just discussed. So here you can see Microsoft Visual Studio with Reporting Services project loaded. And here is the RPT Employees Report. First of all, you can see that we have a report that's a little wider than the design area here. And I can go here to the Zoom dropdown and zoom out a little so that I can see more of the report. I'm going to zoom back in because it's probably hard for you to see. In fact, I'll zoom to a much higher resolution, 150 for now. And take a look here, and you can see the simple expressions shown here on the report. Now, if I right-click and look at the expression dialog, you'll see that you get the old expression that you're used to if you've used reporting services before, which is fields, bang, first name, dot value. But on the design service, you see the much simpler expression, which just makes it simpler and easier to navigate through your report. Over here on the left, you'll see the report data pane. Notice that actually going back to the main designer is we have a design view and we have preview view. In the past, we had 3 views, and now we have only those 2 because we no longer have a data view. Instead of the data view, we have the data pane here. And living in the data pane, we can see, for example, the built-in fields that we have access to that we might put in the header or footer of our report. We have parameters. This particular report doesn't have parameters, but if we had parameters, those parameters would be listed. If we had any images on the report, it would be under the images node. And most importantly, we have the data. Northwind is the name of the shared data connection we are using. And then we have the dataset DS employees that we can access, and we can double click on that and see the dataset properties and go into the query designer. So we have access to all of these things. Instead of going into data view, we can now do it from the data pane. Okay, let's go out of here and mention the grouping pane down here at the bottom. Notice we have a grouping pane which shows row groups and column groups. Now, this particular report is a very simple report. It doesn't actually have any groups, but by default, in a tabular report, you get the built-in details group. Let's switch to a different report. This is a matrix report. And in a matrix report, we have both row groups and column groups. Let me pull up the grouping pane just a little. And you can see we have the row group country, and you see the row group country down here. And we have two column groups, order date, which appears here, and quarter, which appears here. And what you can do with the grouping pane is you can modify properties of a group, you can create new groups, you have a lot of power, and this really elevates grouping to a first-rate part of reporting services. I also want to mention some dialog improvements. If we go to the Report Properties dialog, one of my favorites, as I mentioned, is I can switch from portrait to landscape like that. I don't have to retype in the 8.5 and flip it with the 11 in the text box like I had to do in previous versions of reporting services. Let's talk a little about the Tablix region. And we can see now that this particular report uses what looks like a matrix region, but it is actually taking advantage of the Tablix region. And so did this report here, which was the Tabular report. I'm going to go back to 100% for simplicity. And if I also showed a list report, so I have one up here, this also is a Tablix. Now, if you go to the toolbox and you want to actually add one of these data regions to your report, you'll still see table, matrix, and list. And you're wondering, okay, if I can still see those three on the toolbox, why do you say I have a Tablix region? Well, it's true. What you're basically getting here are starter data regions that you can drag onto the report. So you get the properties of a tabular report or a list report. But the really nice power comes in later when you take a look at one of these reports. If we look at this one here, and what I can do is I can get some attributes of this matrix that make it look like a matrix, but I can add other attributes that make it look like a tabular report, and I can create hybrids across the different styles of report data regions. And that's the real nice thing about the Tablix. You can get a little hint that Tablix is being used if you right-click up here and select Tablix properties. You'll notice it no longer says matrix properties or table properties. You'll see Tablix properties. SQL Server 2008 Reporting Services now has support for rich text. This means that a text box can now have text and fields that are formatted in different ways. Now, to do this, you can either select individual stretches of text or fields and format them directly using the formatting toolbar and property sheet, or you can embed HTML in the data that feeds the text box and have the text formatted using those HTML tags. Now, Reporting Services also has a number of charting improvements. Charts are now easier to customize. In the past, you had to use some convoluted series of dialogues to modify a chart. With SQL Server 2008 Reporting Services, you can now select individual elements of a chart and directly modify them. In addition, Reporting Services 2008 supports a number of new chart types, including stepped line, polar, Gantt, funnel, pyramid, histogram, and box charts. There's a new gauge data region for data visualization. And finally, there's a much improved version of the ad hoc reporting tool, Report Builder. Now let's take a look at some of these new features now. So here we are looking at Visual Studio with a report up. This is called the Customer Letter Text Report. And here you can see a list data region with a single text box. And you can see this single text box has a placeholder for the contact name field, a placeholder for the city field, and a bunch of text that's been formatted in different ways. Now, if I wanted to take, for example, this word loyal, I could take that, select it, bold it, maybe change the color to red, and now I have formatted that stretch of text differently than the other text in the text box. Preview again. You can see as I go through the records, you'll see that the data comes in and the various elements of this single text box are formatted as rich text. Let's take a look at one of the new charts in Reporting Services 2008. This is a polar chart. Let's look at another chart here. Let me pull it up and talk about how you modify charts in Reporting Services 2008. For example, here is our report. I'm going to pull this out just a little, make it easier. In the past, to change, say, the axes here, I would have to go to a dialog, but now I can just click on it directly, select it, and let's say I want to change that to product sales. Obviously, I'm going to want to play with the wrapping and the room and whatnot. If I wanted to change the length of the axes and have it start at 50 or such, or change this to currency or number of digits to the right of the decimal place, I can directly select these things and change them. Same thing here. If I wanted all these guys to be bolded, I can do that directly. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the new data visualization features in Reporting Services. Let's pull up this gauge report here. And you can see we've added a gauge and embedded this within a matrix report so that in this report we can show how big of sales that this particular company contributed to the sales report, for example. Let's take a look at the new report builder. Now, if you've used the previous report builder, that's Report Builder 1.0 that came with SQL Server 2005, you knew that it was frustrating and that you could only build certain types of reports, and you had to set up data in a very special way to allow that to be used. Well, with Reporting Services 2008, now all those limitations are gone. With Report Builder 2.0 that comes with SQL Server 2008, you can take just about any report that was created in Visual Studio and edit it in Report Builder 2.0. You can create brand new reports, of course, in Report Builder 2.0 also. You can see here we have the grouping pane in Report Builder 2. We have the data pane, and that everything looks really similar, but at the same time, it's easier to use. You don't have all the complexity of Visual Studio 2008, and it uses the new Office 2007 bar here to work with the menus. As you can see, Report Builder 2.0 is a real win for the information